In the last video, we talked about supply using the example of the resale market for Aggie football tickets. Today we want to start talking more generally about supply. So you have the idea of supply in mind. Now let's talk about it more generally. Remember that all the analysis of supply and demand is driven by scarcity, wanting more than we have of something, or of all things. Supply is especially closely linked to scarcity. There are two basic reasons. So there are two reasons that production of certain items gets concentrated. So you have, this is for concentrated production. And remember, concentrated production is why people buy and sell things in markets. Some people make some things and trade them in the market, and some people buy things in the market, and so forth. The two reasons for concentrated production are economies of specialization, and I'm going to abbreviate that as econ of specialization, and repetition. And the second one is comparative advantage. And what we're going to talk about today is the first of these. And that is economies of specialization and repetition. These two factors are present in nearly all economic situations, from the very simplest tasks in an economy to the most complex. Let's start with this one, economies of specialization. I want to focus your attention on an incredibly simple example of these types of economies. That example is found in the book we talked about several videos ago, Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. And it concerns the manufacture of simple straight pins. These simple straight pins, you may not realize it, but the manufacture of those straight pins requires 18 different steps according to Adam Smith. And the steps are kind of like this. You have a spool of wire, you have to cut the ends of the wire into pin-sized pieces. Then you have to straighten that out because when you cut it, it bends it. Then you have to cut another little piece of wire off that's needed for the head of the pin. Then you're going to flatten it. Then you're going to shape it into a head. Then you're going to attach it, and so forth. Adam Smith argued in his book that an individual person making pins would be lucky to make 10 in a day. And it might be only one. However, he goes through his book and he looks at a pin factory, and in a pin factory there was a team of 10 men, each specializing in one or two tasks. That pin factory could make 48,000 pins in a day, or 4,800 pins per worker per day, of course. So instead of producing, say, one pin or 1 to 10 pins as an individual, if you team up and do repetition, then you can make 4,800 per worker. People spend a lot of time, there's actually a fairly big literature on this example, and they worry about the exact nature of what makes the team so much more productive than the individual workers. Is it repetition and experience regarding each task, or is it the specialized capital at the factory? I don't really care, never have cared much. Because for our purposes, it is not important. What is important is that when you specialize production, the tasks of the workers, they become much more efficient. And it could be because of capital or because of doing the same thing over and over again. That means that workers have an incentive to concentrate on producing one part of the task. Or to put it differently, to participate in a team producing that item. But the workers who produce these pens can't live by eating those pens. That's just nonsense. This means that the owner of the pen factory is going to need to sell the pens so that he can pay the workers. This need to sell in a market implies that there will be a supply curve for pens, which we can construct. And here's how we're going to do it. So let's say that it costs $10 an hour for a worker, and that's going to be equal to $80 a day. Now we have 4,800 pens per worker, and so we can take 4,800 pens and we're going to divide that. The cost of those pens would be $80. And I'm going to rewrite this down here as $80 divided by 4,800. This comes out to be about 2 cents a pen. It's a little bit less than that, but we're going to call it 2 cents a pen. And so if we have 2 cents a pen, and that's what the labor costs, now let's assume that the materials and the factory, the contribution to overhead, is going to add another 2 cents to the cost of a pen. Then what you're going to have is you're going to have a supply curve. You're going to have to make enough money selling pens to cover these two costs. And so no pens will be supplied if the price is less than 4 cents. But at that price, you can have all the pens you want. And there will be a demand for pens, okay, to purchase in the market because it is going to be much cheaper to buy pens at 4 cents a piece than to take an entire day or an hour to make a single pen. And this means that because of the returns to specialization in manufacture, pens will be manufactured by teams and sold. This same principle applies to things as simple as pens and as complicated as iPhones.